Hello, everybody. This is Ryan MacArthur coming to you live today from a sweltering British office. And as a guy who grew up in Virginia, dealing with like 110-degree summers, especially doing preseason running and all that stuff, it's really humbling to be in like 85 and feel like you're melting. But, you know, houses were built to trap heat over here. So it is what it is, as they say. So today we're going to do things just a little bit different. Instead of going through the normal presentation we like to do, normal webinar where we kind of walk people through the basics of a job search, instead what I've done is solicited questions from people I work with, clients, some of my peers, things like that, just to A, take a different approach, but B, lots of people have questions about their own careers, the job market, things like that. And, they're going to ask ChatGPT, they're going to ask their friends, they're going to Google stuff, and you're never really sure where the information's coming from. So what we're trying to do today is give people an opportunity to ask questions. So on top of the ones that I have from folks that we solicit them from, people are welcome to drop comments or drop something in the chat, in the comments regarding a question about their resume, LinkedIn, job search strategy, interviews. You ever wanted to ask a career coach a question? Now you get a chance. And this is something we also do through Nari, our platform that is built to help virtually anybody, but it's targeted towards people returning from work after a long extended break, whether that's from looking after a family member, whether that's taking time off to recover from an injury, maybe it's after having kids. And what we do is have open office hours where people can come in and just have a chat, right? And if it's one-on-one, that's no problem. There's a few other people in the group. We try to bounce ideas off each other. But the point is that we try to make ourselves as available as we can to share these insights. And, I'll be the first person to say, I am not the only career coach on the planet. I am not the end all be all. I don't know everything. But I have been doing this for a while, and we maintained a very solid success rate, let's put it that way, regarding getting our folks interviews within roughly 6 months. Now, there's going to be outliers on either side of that. When people ask me, which let's go with question number one, how long does it take to get a job in this market? And unfortunately, the answer is going to be, it depends. For most people that I work with, it takes roughly 3 to 6 months from day one of sending in your resume to your first day on the job. Again, there's going to be outliers on either side of that. I've had some clients, they're in a new job within 3 days, 1 or 2 interviews, bing, bang, they're on the job. Some can take up to 9 to 12 months. I had one client, she had 14 rounds of interviews over, I believe it was an 8 to 9 month period. Took forever, and it was with NVIDIA during their big stock boom. She still didn't get it. Now, she ended up at a great company regardless. But the point is, I try to tell people, expect anything, right? This market is very topsy-turvy. You're going to have some companies will go cold on you for a period and then come back out of nowhere and say, hey, actually, the person we spoke to, we offered the job to, dropped out. Would you like to have a conversation about this opportunity? You would be surprised how often this happens. So one of the things we try to tell people to do is keep those relationships warm, right? If you have a long and arduous process of going through rounds of interviews, stuff like that, and you still don't get it, as challenging as it might be, you got to kill them with kindness, right? You want to keep that positive feeling in their head about who you are as a professional and as a person. Because the same thing goes for sales, the same thing goes for interviews, the same thing goes for these types of situations. People very, very rarely remember what you say, but they usually remember how you made them feel, right? So we want to leave each engagement with just a good, solid feeling that, hey, this is somebody who's on point. She's got her ducks in a row. She's delivering value, and she's a great person, right? That's the individual who's typically going to get the job, as opposed to maybe somebody who's a bit more brusque or, burn the bridge, so to speak, because that doesn't mean you have to change who you are, right? Some people are a little bit more introverted. They're going to have a different approach, maybe not be as bubbly or energetic. that's okay. But whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, still be a nice person, as simple as that sounds. So yeah, that's a one to get us rolling. So let's dive into our first question here. Right, this is one that comes up at Nari all the time. If someone's had a 6-month gap on their resume, do they hide it, explain it, or reframe it? Now, this is going to depend on location, right? And I'll give you an example. I did a project a few years back where we were working with people who were living in Hong Kong, who were going to then come over to the UK due to the political situation over there. And according to everyone I talked to, there's at least a couple dozen folks in Hong Kong. If you have a gap over 2 or 3 weeks, that can be a real problem, right? Within your CV, they're going to ask lots of questions about why. So when, my folks from Hong Kong were coming over and they're like, oh my God, I haven't worked in like 3 months because of all the stuff that's going on. Am I even going to be able to get a job? Well, yeah, UK is very different. Europe as well. I mean, it's not uncommon to take an extended period of time off, whether that's for travel, whether that's to, again, take time away to spend with family after, birth of a new child, things like that, or just, taking some time to step away. Typically, when it comes to the UK or Europe, I feel like we need to address a gap. If it's over 12 to 18 months, that's when I start to get a bit worried about it, and we need to address it. I mean, in my professional opinion, I like to get out ahead of these things, anything that could be perceived as a negative. So for me, there's no harm in saying career break, right? So within like that professional experience section within the resume, listing out career break as like the company, and then instead of a job title, what were you doing? Was it professional development? Was it caretaking? Was it, recovering from injury, stuff like that? Now, depending on who you are as a person, what, industry sectors that you're going to target, you may not want to include that stuff, right? Again, so much of it depends on what the specificities are. However, it's kind of a general rule for me. We can't, there's only, I mean, I shouldn't even say hide, right? There's only so much we can redirect, right? And at the end of the day, things like our age, if we took time off, if we were laid off and we just struggled to get it back in the job market, that's what happened, right? And there's going to be reasons for those things happening. But the point I'm trying to get to is that getting ahead of it, answering these things earnestly, and trying to not spin it, but demonstrate how this demonstrates value, right? So again, if you took time off and did some professional development, that might give you a skill set that's going to give you more of an advantage in the job market potentially. Or, if you're looking to change careers and maybe during that break, you did a little bit of volunteer work that aligns with that new role that you want to try to target. These are good things to talk about. But if you were just kind of sitting around playing video games for 12 months because you wanted to take the time off, we'd probably stay away from that or massage that language a bit. So yeah, and I mean, again, and if we're talking about the US, I start to get a bit nervous about a job gap that goes, again, it's going to depend on the sector, but it's not uncommon to see somebody with 6 to 12 months of a gap just within this current market. And that's something to remember as well. Recruiters, headhunters, hiring managers, they're aware of the market conditions at the moment, right? You don't necessarily have job hoppers anymore. You have people who are just hugging and holding on to jobs for dear life. So you're not seeing as much movement, as much mobility within the market. Because of that, less opportunities to advance or to find a new role if you're made redundant, you're fired, terminated, laid off, whatever words you want to use. So you will get the benefit of the doubt to a degree. But again, for me, in my humble professional opinion, getting ahead of a gap and explaining it before we have to answer questions in an interview, stuff like that, which you're likely still will, but you at least have kind of set the table, so to speak. And the simplest answer is typically the most effective. If you ever find yourself saying, wait, let me explain, something's probably gone wrong. But if it's just a smooth delivery where it's like, well, after my last role where I was laid off, really wanted to take some time to recharge my batteries. I did some professional development courses and worked on my house. And now I'm excited to get back in the game and deliver value for this organization. Simple, clean, to the point, right? The more we think we have to explain things, that's when stuff can start to go downhill. So however you decide to explain a gap, keep it simple, keep it to the point. Right. That's our first question. All right. So what's the one interview answer that even senior accomplished people consistently get wrong? Tell me about yourself. The tell me about yourself question. There's a lot riding on that answer, right? And it's how we're going to dictate the rest of that conversation or the rest of that interview. Because what we don't want an interview to feel like is an interrogation where it's just question, answer. That's awkward. It's stilted. It's going to leave a bad taste in the mouth. What we want an interview to feel like is a conversation, right? An opportunity where you say something, I say something, we find common ground. You have a laugh, I have a laugh. It feels like I'm talking to an old buddy. So something then triggers in that person's mind where it's like, oh, this person's familiar. I like this person. And at the end of the day, any hiring process, it's a popularity contest. Who do I like more? Now, there's also the aspects of who's going to make me money, save me money, build me a better team. But at the end of the day, they're going to go with somebody they like, right? So we want to make sure you're that person. So one of the ways we get off on the right foot for situations like that is instead of just answering, tell me about yourself by saying, well, I was born in Pocosin, Virginia, and then I went to Pocosin High School, and then I graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University and blah, 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 blah. Same stuff everybody else has said. Okay. Instead, what I challenge people to do is to tell a story, right, that demonstrates not just who you are, but the value that you're going to deliver. Share something personal, right? So maybe talk about what was the catalyst that made you want to be who you are as a professional, right? Or tell me about that story that made you fall in love with your job, right? I know for me, I always use the example. It's like, well, soccer was my career as a coach, player, before I even started this business. And through that, I had to learn how to deal with a lot of diversity, right? Having to perform under pressure, right? Learning different languages, dealing with hostile crowds, a lot of things I can pull from that have kind of tempered me as a professional and have really set the tone for who I am today. So by telling stories like that, you're getting to know me a little bit as a person, right? And instead of me just telling you what my soft skills are, I'm showing, right? And that show part is really important. That's what tends to stick, right? Because if I tell you I've got adaptability, I'm comfortable under pressure, blah, blah, blah. All right, maybe believe me, maybe you don't. But through the stories that I tell, right, you get there on your own. Now you're much more likely to buy into that idea, right? So it's a little bit of social engineering, but at the end of the day, right, we want to get that interview feeling like it's a conversation between two old friends. And that tell me about yourself question, that's the one that usually trips people up, whether they're the CEO or, junior professional trying to get their first job. Right. Let's see. So we got a question in the chat. I was told it never passes the ATS due to employment gap in resume, so it gets rejected even if all the criterias are met. Not sure what the question is, but I'll work through it. So, a lot of misconceptions about applicant tracking systems. They're not determining who gets the job. They're filtering tools, they're databases, right, for applications and resumes. Now, there are features within an ATS that can allow a recruiter to screen out for certain things, right? Whether that's based on location, whether that's based on, okay, anybody who's got less than this amount of experience, but more than this, cut them. Or they might look for certain keywords and phrases using just a simple keyword search or a Boolean search. Very rarely will somebody just get screened for having too big of a gap. Because at the end of the day, it's a human decision. Right now, AI is getting a little bit more involved regarding, helping people to make those decisions. So it goes back to what I said before about addressing a gap. I mean, we can't get around it, right? There's, either we're doing something during that period or we don't. So we want to make sure that we at least articulate, okay, what we were doing and is there any value that we can derive from that? Now, when it comes to, you find yourself as somebody who's like, oh, I've sent out hundreds of applications. I'm not getting any luck. I'm not getting through the ATS. I keep getting these auto rejects. Could be something due to formatting, right? Where the software just isn't reading the information in your resume correctly. Could be you're just not a right fit for those roles. I mean, you'd be surprised how many people I work with who will show me a job description and be like, I'm perfect for this. This is my dream job. This is everything I've been working up towards. And they're miles off from it due to maybe the experience, the achievements, the expertise, certain qualities or traits that role requires. So part of it can come down to a bit of introspection, right? Really looking inside to see, okay, am I actually a good fit for this role, or am I talking myself into it? Because believe me, as somebody who does what I do, I can talk anybody into or out of a job. It's not hard, right? There's always going to be plus and minuses on either side. So one of the ways that I try to coach people regarding, okay, what's a green light for an application? What's something we should definitely target, right? We want to look at that job description and I'm not as focused on the title. I'm not as focused on, okay, what's the company about? I'm more focused on, in that job description, what are the main problems that you would be solving at this company, right? Do you have achievements? Do you have examples from your career where you can say, hey, I've solved this problem, here's an outcome? If those align with what that job's asking for, it makes sense to apply, regardless of gaps, keywords, all that stuff. But if you're looking at that job description and you're struggling to find examples from your career where you have solved the same or similar problems, and if we can't find them, we should move on from that role, right? Unless you have a direct connection, like you can walk into the door of that hiring manager's house and say, hey, I'm keen on this role, let's talk about it, which is never going to happen. Well, it could. I'm not going to say it can't, but the point I'm trying to get to is that circumventing the applicant tracking system, right? Going directly to the source, that tends to produce better results than just firing off 100 resumes and hoping for the best. So one thing I'll do real quick, I'm going to put a link in the chat to a Google Doc. Hopefully this will go out across all the different places that we're posting on. So I believe we're on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn today. Basically, the link that I just shared is to a Google Doc that has some instructions for how you can track down hiring managers, how you can find that person's email address, and then some templates you can use to reach out directly. The point I'm trying to get at is applications are very binary, right? You either get the interview or you don't. Only two things can happen. And sometimes you don't hear anything at all. So I guess chalk that up to you didn't get the interview. But a conversation's different. Okay, a conversation can go many different places. Could be planting seeds that we cultivate 6 months down the road. It could be, hey, I don't have anything for you at my company, but my partner, his company is trying to build out a team. Do you want to have a conversation? Right? These are ways that we get around the ATS, because I can tell you, bar none, you apply for a job online, you don't know anybody at that company, you typically have less than a 1% chance of getting an interview. And that is regardless of what I or anybody else does to the resume. So the more we can focus on leveraging people, leveraging relationships, to get us in the door, now we're cooking. Now we're talking about real opportunities. Because the frustrating thing is you'll go on LinkedIn and you'll see, oh, there's millions of jobs out there. There's tons of them, right? Why aren't I getting them? Well, because you're competing with everybody else in the world, right? You look at any job that goes up on LinkedIn within a couple hours could have 1, 2, 3, 500 applicants, right? And majority of those applicants probably aren't even suited to the role. You have bots that are just applying for jobs automatically. And that's a whole nother story that I could go into. And I'm not a big fan of that. I'm not a big fan of the cast a wide net and see what happens. I'm more of the, let's take that sniper rifle and be very direct, very deliberate, very strategic with which roles we target, how we position the resume, what we put on LinkedIn, what we talk about during interviews. That tends to produce better results than just firing off like 100 resumes every week and just kind of hoping for the best. So, right, let's move on to another question. Oh, got one, a good one for networking. So for people who generally hate networking, the quieter, introverted high performers, right? What does it look like when it's done well, right? So I guess the question is, how can you network properly if you're not somebody who's naturally outgoing? And it's tricky, right? Because my first thing I try to tell people to do is, look, if we want to make a change, we oftentimes have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone, right? If we do the same thing over and over again and expect the same result or expect a different result, believe that's the definition of insanity, or that's the old cliche or phrase that went around, at least when I was in high school. That's what my dad loved to say all the time. And many good nuggets of knowledge there. But point I'm trying to get to is that we do have to push ourselves a bit to start conversations with strangers sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean we're going around bragging, saying how awesome we are, things like that. Let's get back to basics, right? What did we talk about earlier? Getting a job is a popularity contest, right? We need to get these people to like us. So one of the easiest ways to get somebody talking, right, and get them to like you is ask them about their job. People love to talk about what they do and themselves to a degree. So we play into that, right? And one of the, at least in my humble professional opinion, one of the best places to go right now to source new opportunities, in-person events, conferences, workshops, roundtables, expos, anywhere where you can, meet and greet and mingle with people who speak the same language as you, right? Who live in that same world, whether it's the industry, the sector, the type of job. That's where we tend to find opportunities, right? I remember when I got my first job back in 2001, maybe 2002, it was at KB Toys in Patrick Henry Mall. Still remember exactly where that store used to be, right by the Chick-fil-A. And I remember I just walked in and I asked the manager, "Are you guys hiring?" She handed me application. I filled it out right then and there. I was working the next day. There really is a longing for those types of interactions again, because the hiring process is so impersonal now, whether it's applicant tracking systems, whether that is AI agents or chatbots doing the first round of interview, like that's something you might have to deal with. It's hard to get just to a person, right? So let's go be around people who are in our world and might be able to help us with a referral, with an introduction, right? And again, we started by asking questions like that link that I just shared within the chat to the Google Doc. The whole strategy behind starting these conversations is by asking questions. So if we're talking about a job that's open, I might ask, hey, I'd love to learn a little bit more about this role, right? I want to make sure this is the right fit for me and I'm the right fit for you. That's low key. That's somebody who's, again, very strategic and very deliberate about what he's looking for and where he can deliver value, right? Whereas you go to somebody and you're like, hey, I really want to interview for this job. Or, hey, I'm really looking for this next opportunity. I think your company's awesome. Coming off a little desperate, a little thirsty, right? And I always make the dumb joke, and I've said this 100 times to so many different clients, getting a job is like dating, right? You can't come on too hard. You can't come off too soft. You got to find that middle ground between showing interest and not coming off as desperate. And it's a fine line to walk, right? And for introverts, it's usually a little bit easier because you're not going to come off as overly enthusiastic. But we do have to find ways to start those conversations. Now, the hack to get around that for my introverts is to share thought leadership on LinkedIn. So it doesn't always have to be LinkedIn, but LinkedIn's a great place to start. Now, when I say thought leadership, I am not talking about the aspirational bullshit posts where it's like, oh, this is what walking my dog taught me about P&L management. Like, I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. What we're looking to do is share knowledge, share stories about, this was a problem I had at work. This is how me and my team fixed it. Here's the outcome. Maybe this is something your team can use. Or what do you guys think about this? Sharing stories, sharing knowledge. That's the only currency that matters anymore on LinkedIn, right? Everybody who's been on LinkedIn for more than 5 minutes knows that it's just a big hash of like marketing opportunity. I mean, people marketing stuff to you, stuff like that. People trying to self-promote, all these things. So there's a lot of noise, but the things that tend to work best, at least when I work on them for, my clients, things like that, it becomes the foundation for our interview stories, right? It becomes one of those things that we really look to hone, cut the fat from, really trim down so that it's most impactful state, right? Problem, solution, result, what'd you learn from it? And we usually can accomplish that in about 250 to 300 words, give or take. It's all you need, right? You don't need a big novel where you share every single detail. Again, these things are meant to be like conversation starters. So if I read this and then we go into an interview, maybe I'll ask you questions about it. I'm going to be curious. Maybe it's a situation where we have solved a very similar or the same problem that company's looking for. They come across a thought leadership post. Now maybe we're talking about a new opportunity. That is literally how one of my clients, who is one of the most highest earners I have, landed his gig. We were sharing thought leadership, and it just happened to address that core problem that company was after, or one of them at least. So you're somebody who's an introvert, you struggle to network. Things like thought leadership can be a big help regarding bringing people to you. But at the same time, it's not about being cheesy and over promotional. It's just about starting a conversation, right? Asking people about their jobs, just being a good person, right? Again, as simple as that sounds. And I don't mean to make it so reductive where it's like, oh, you just have to be a nice person, you're going to walk into a job. There are many different factors that go into it, but being somebody who people enjoy being around, enjoy working with, stuff like that, can go a long way towards opening up new opportunities. Let's see. Good question. Everyone gives me different advice on this. Does it actually matter if my resume is 1 page or 2? This comes up all the time. And again, it's my least favorite word, depends. I'm not talking about the adult diapers either. There's going to be certain situations where even if you have 30 years of experience, a 1-pager might be all you need. So for example, I'm working with a group of folks at a engineering company, and they're doing big layoffs. And a lot of these guys have been with the companies for a long time, pretty much doing the exact same job for 20, 30 years. And what we don't want to do is just repeat the same stuff over and over again on the resume, especially if the person only had 2 or 3 different jobs at that company. What we want to do is show that evolution of those achievements, how they started small and how they've gotten bigger over the years. And we may only need 1 page, 500 words to accomplish that. Formatting is going to make a difference on that as well. with Nari's resume engine, so with our platform Nari, everybody has access to a resume engine that allows you to input information, your current resume, and it will build it using my methodologies, that I've developed over about 12 years. And there's going to be situations where, you're only going to need a one pager, and that's fine, right? What we don't want to do is include a bunch of fluff and filler to get us to 2 pages just because we feel like we should, or we cut a bunch of important details to get us back to 1 page because we think we should. We want to have some flexibility there, a little bit of fluidity with it. So, I mean, for me, if somebody's had 4 jobs in over 5 years, I'll probably stick to a 2-pager, right? Again, depending on how those achievements align with that job the person's looking to get. If they're looking to make a change of career or move to a different industry, we may want to condense it down to 1 page because all the information that we have, it's all going to point to a different type of job or a different type of industry. So I need to condense all that. I don't want to say it's irrelevant content, but stuff that isn't as important, and really focus on, okay, what is the achievements? What are the achievements that best align with the job? What are the key words that are going to be most important to include that we can use organically, not shoehorned in there? And again, if it's 1 page, fine. Typically, for majority of the folks I work with, though, we're looking at 2 pages, around 1,000 words. Anything more starts to overwhelm the reader. Nari's engine is built to keep it at 2 pages, just because, again, anything more starts to be overkill. Most people only spend about 7 to 13 seconds reviewing a resume, right? You have a snapshot, a short window. So what we typically want to do is trim the fat, get rid of all the stuff that isn't important, and focus on the value, right? So the way Nari works is we have a notable achievement section. So what it will do is look through what you shared with it. Okay, these are the jobs you're targeting. These are the achievements that best align with those types of jobs. And it's going to put it right smack dab in the middle of page 1 in a notable achievement section. Because according to heat map studies, most people read a resume in the shape of a letter F, and they spend a majority of their time in the middle of page 1. So we want to get the most relevant achievements up front and center. Again, this can go a long way towards opening the door for new opportunities because we're addressing those core elements of what that job's asking for immediately. It's typically going to be one of the first things that reader sees outside of your name and the title of what we put on the resume. So there's going to be situations as well where you might need something more than 2 pages. So for example, when I have somebody who is in the C-suite or on a senior leadership team for like a FTSE 1000 company, we might push to 3 pages, and that's okay. As long as it's relevant and as long as it's impactful content. Filler, I'm cutting it. I don't need that just for the sake of having it. What I do want is enough room to include achievements. And if that means pushing to 3 pages, fine. Again, that's going to be for very specific situations. In academia, not uncommon for a CV to be 7, 8, 9. I've had some as far as like 40 pages because a lot of it was just publications that people listed out. We can save a lot of time and space and paper by including just a link to our Google Scholar page or any of the other sites that host life sciences publications, things like that. Point is, a little bit of flexibility can go a long way, right? For usajobs.gov, so federal roles in the United States, it used to be those things could be upwards of 6, 7, 8 pages. Now, 2 pages. It's all you get, right? Which I think is a good thing because it forces people to focus on the most relevant, most important information, and as opposed to just listing out every single responsibility they have. Because that's the thing too, when it comes to resumes, people feel like they need to list out every single thing they were responsible for. For that, I would rather have an overview. Instead, focus more detail on the accomplishments and outcomes of your work. That's the stuff people really care about at the end of the day. Like I can look at your job description and figure out pretty quickly, all right, what does this person do? Might be a little off, but for the most part, I'm going to get it close. What I'm really interested in is what did you do with your experience, your knowledge, your expertise, your skill set, and what outcomes did you deliver? When we can accomplish that, we tend to get better results in the job market. Right, so we are humming right along. Oh, this is a good one. Any tips for staying sharp on a Zoom interview at 11 p.m. because my time, because of the time difference? Yeah. Somebody who's based in the UK and has clients over the world, all over the world, I can 100% empathize. Um, I mean, the obvious ones are there. A little bit of caffeine maybe could go a long way, but you also got to go to sleep after this. For me, it's staying engaged, right? So doing something that is going to keep my mind active, but not wear me out. So, I mean, for me, I'm a big proponent of get a little exercise in before an interview, right? Because you're going to have that adrenaline dump at some point, right? You're going to get the butterflies in the chest. And if you're not, and it's an interview, that's sometimes that's a red flag for me because it's like, well, you probably don't really care about this role that much, or you don't feel like you have a lot on the line. Whereas you do have some nerves, right? That's a good thing. Like I used to compete as an amateur mixed martial artist. And I remember one of my coaches telling me, if you're not scared walking down to that cage, something is wrong. You should be afraid, right? Not afraid like, oh, I don't want to do this, but like conscious of there's something at stake here. I need to be on my toes. I need to be in the moment so that I can perform to the best of my ability. So for me, if somebody had an interview at 11 p.m. over Zoom, I'd say, all right, come 9:30, 10 o'clock, I'm going to go take a run. I'm going to work out at the house. I'm going to do some push-ups, some body weight squats, whatever. Try to channel that nervous energy. And then as far as making sure that, you know, we're staying sharp and whatnot, I don't want to sit there and rehearse my responses like it's a script. That's going to come off as awkward and inauthentic. Instead, what I might do, and this is where things like AI can come in handy, is chuck that job description into Claude or ChatGPT or whatever and say, what are some likely interview questions I'm going to come up against? And practice that way, right? So ask it to throw some curveballs at you, ask it to throw some challenging ones so that you have to work your way through it, right? Those are some of the ways I'd recommend staying sharp outside of just chugging coffee and, you know, eating a bunch of candy or something. But it can be tough because I've been there myself, you know, having to do client calls at all hours of the night. Now having a baby at home kind of helped with that, with the adaptability for lack of sleep and just working weird hours. But hopefully it's not something this person has had to do a lot of, because that's not going to be fun if you're consistently doing job interviews when you should be sleeping. Let's see. I had a question. I'm barely on LinkedIn. How do I start networking without it feeling completely fake? There's a couple ways to do that. So one, everything needs to feel organic, right? And authentic. And going back to what I've said before about just trying to be a nice person, and how far that can take you in the job search and the job market in general. One of the best ways to network on LinkedIn, especially if it's somebody you haven't spoken to in a while, maybe it's an old colleague you worked with like 5-10 years ago. You had a good rapport, but you weren't like best friends or anything, and you just kind of fell out of touch. Send that person a recommendation on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn allows you to get and give recommendations to anybody you're connected with. It's a great way to start a conversation with somebody you haven't spoken to in a while. Just say something nice. You know, more often than not, that person's going to reach back out and say, hey, that was really cool. Thanks for saying that. They'll probably write you a recommendation. And then maybe they'll ask, hey, what's going on in your world? What are you up to? And now we can take the conversation wherever we want to. Because going back to what we said before, applications go one of two ways. We get the interview or we don't. Whereas a conversation can go many different places, right? And that's the goal with any job search strategy I help somebody come up with. We start conversations, right? You go on any news site and you will find an article about, I've submitted 400 applications this month and I still haven't got an interview. I'm not going to say that person hasn't been networking, hasn't been having conversations, but it's likely that's the case, right? Never know the full story. But the point is, I know from my experience with having this business for 12 years that the spray and pray approach of just sending out applications, as many as you can, very rarely works. It's going to work for some people just by attrition, or I don't think that's the right word, but anyway, it's going to work at some point. But for a majority of people, it's going to come down to networking. That is one of the things I tell pretty much everybody nowadays. You are going to find this next job through somebody you know. That's how we're getting this thing done consistently. Is it impossible to find a role without a referral or connection and introduction? It's not impossible. It's just like trying to buy a lottery ticket at this point. And look, I'm not in the business of gambling when it comes to helping people find new opportunities. Again, I want to be strategic. I want to be deliberate with who I reach out to, how I position the resume, what I do on LinkedIn. Now, again, going back to the question where it's like, how do I network on LinkedIn without feeling completely fake? By sharing thought leadership, you're going to naturally attract more eyeballs to your profile. So we're going to be able to start networking that way. Asking industry questions as well, like information you genuinely want to know. So especially for my younger clients who are just getting into the job market, we kind of go through a process where it's like, all right, what are the companies that you're interested in? Or what are the types of roles that you really want to target? Start connecting with people who do those jobs, who are at those companies. And just say, hey, I'd love to know a little bit more about what it's like working at your company. What are some of the cool projects you got to work on? I'm kind of exploring the market at the moment, just looking to gather some information. Great way of networking. And the thing to remember too is when you are networking and you're doing it right, it's not always about getting a job. Again, sometimes it's about planting seeds that we cultivate later down the road. Sometimes it's about sharing, like if you read an industry book, right, or a book related to your industry, your job, or whatever, and you share that with a friend or a peer, that's networking. You know, when my car broke down a few months back, I asked my neighbor, hey, do you know a good mechanic? He's like, yeah, I know this guy up the road, gave me his card. That's networking. Again, it's not always about finding a job. It's exchanging information, ideas, things like that, having a nice conversation with somebody. These are the things that tend to lead to more opportunities, especially the higher up the ladder we go. Because if a role is going to be paying upwards of 200, 300, 400K, they're very rarely just going to post that job on LinkedIn and see who shows up. Instead, they're going to go out and find that person. And through networking, that's how you can be that person who gets found. And I hate using passive voice, but there it is. So as much as networking is like the dirty word right now, and it probably always has been, it's more critical than ever. Put it that way. Let's see. A lot of those are the same. Okay. Well, this person wrote a lot. Economists are calling this a low hire, low fire market. I think that's fair. Overall labor turnover has pulled back and the environment is largely continuing along those lines. What should somebody actually do differently in a market like this versus 2 years ago? Look, a couple years ago, like coming fresh out of the pandemic, you could have a generic resume that was one size fits all. It was easy to just simply apply, especially the one-click stuff, and start getting some traction that way. It's not the case right now. It really, truly isn't. So we have to find different approaches to get this done. Because again, you spend 5 minutes on any news site and you will see an article about how young people are really struggling to get in because, well, how are they taught to get a job? The same things that we were taught, you know, over the past 5, 10, 15 years, and they're not working anymore. So we have to find new routes of getting in the door. So for example, you know, how do we deal with the, oh, you need 1 year experience, but I'm trying to get my first job. Volunteerism is probably the quickest, most efficient way to getting that, right? Because people sometimes look down on volunteer experience, and I think that's the wrong approach to it. And I'll give you an example. I was working with this one gentleman, data analyst, really super keen, had a degree from a great school, but just could not get a sniff. So what we did was figured out, okay, what are 3 things that he can do for any charitable organization right now? within his expertise, whether that was building a database, whether that was analyzing financials, blah, 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 whatever. And we went to multiple different charities around where he lived. And we pitched them basically. It was like, hey, I'd love to support this cause. These are some things I can help with. Is there anything I can do? And I think we reached out to 10 and maybe like 2 got back to him. We're like, hey, yeah, we need help doing X, Y, Z. Now we got some projects we can work on. Now we can list out some names on the CV and talk about the outcomes of our work, even if that's just making somebody's life a little bit easier, shaving some time off of somebody's workload, or giving them more accurate data that they can use to then influence their decisions, right? Point is, sometimes you are going to have to work for free. And this includes people who are trying to change career as well, right? Because it's the way the market is at the moment, again, extremely challenging, right? And one of these side doors that we found is get that volunteer experience, right? Rack up some achievements, not just the experience. I'm talking about the achievements. And now we can flesh these things out on the resume a bit more. Now we've got a little bit more to talk about during the interview. These are the things that tend to be working a bit more than just like spray and pray regarding pinging out applications, things like that. And again, it's always going to depend on the situation. Where does this person live? What's this person's background? Was this person a veteran? Does this person have a degree? And to that matter as well, I can tell you and I don't think it's any secret either, the degree, it's not the game changer it used to be. I mean, you'd be surprised how many of my highest earning clients don't have a degree and never got one, right? And they're in their 50s, 60s and did just fine. Whereas I have some clients who are early in their career, really struggling to find a role and are piled with debt, up to their ears from getting a degree that just isn't helping to open doors. So for me, the real value from that college experience, that university experience, is going to come down to the relationships that you can build, right? With your peers, with alumni, folks like that. Like, I give an example, like VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, one of the best networks in America, right? And believe me, I'm not shilling for VMI at all. I went to Virginia Commonwealth University, but I do know that their network is fantastic, that they really look after each other. University of Florida, Gators look after each other. Hokies at Virginia Tech, they look after each other. Texas, I mean, you name it, right? When you share that experience, people usually want to go to bat for you. So one of the things I always recommend as well is go into those alumni databases. See, all right, who are the people who went to my school who are at this organization I'm trying to work at? Can I start a conversation? Can I ask for a referral? Because that's a big thing too. Probably the biggest divider between the people I work with are the individuals who are comfortable asking for help and the ones who aren't. And I'll let you decide who probably does better in the market, right? The more comfortable you can get asking for help. And it doesn't mean you're asking for a job or an interview. It's, hey, would you be comfortable connecting me with a hiring manager? Or, hey, can you help me with a referral? Oftentimes with that referral, there's a bonus tied to it, right? An opportunity to make a little bit of money just by, filling out a form and sending an email, right? I've seen them as low as like a $5 gift card. I've seen them as much as like 5% of the person's salary, right? It just depends. So the simple act of asking for help, you might be paying that person's mortgage at some point, or you might be sending them on a nice holiday. So there really is a onus on that, right? And that's probably, one of the biggest differences between now and a couple of years ago, whereas, yeah, much more straightforward regarding the application process, going through all that, blah, blah, blah. Whereas now we almost have to circumvent that. We have to go against what they're telling us to do in a sense, because that's what's making things happen, right? It's people, it's relationships. Let's see here. Is it just me, or has it gotten way harder to even hear back this year? I've sent something like 80 applications. Yeah, sounds about right. I mean, I'm not going to rehash all the extra stuff I've already said, but it is a tough market. That's undeniable. As much as, I don't know, I see reports about, oh, job growth in this country, that country. Somebody who's on kind of in the trenches, so to speak, there's a lot of folks out there who are really struggling in the market. And I don't see government on either side of the pond doing a lot or enough to help people. And that doesn't mean you force companies into hiring or you, you know, create some program that's not going to push anybody into new opportunities. I don't know, that's not what I'm trying to get at. The point is I think it's more about literacy with how to navigate this. And you know, it's not anybody's fault. The job market has changed so rapidly over the past few years, especially with the advent of AI and things like that. I mean, that's definitely thrown a wrench in the gears, because you're seeing, you know, I can't tell you how many AI generated resumes come across my desk that people are like, I'm not getting anything with this. Well, it's like, yeah, because it's all the same stuff everybody else has said. And funny enough, I had a client from a while ago reach out to me, and he's very, very kind, but shared some feedback that somebody gave about a resume I wrote for him a few years ago before AI was available to people. And the person was like, oh, this is clearly written by AI and polished by it and da-da-da. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't have that back then. So it was an interesting piece of feedback. But one of the things I do hear from my network of recruiters, headhunters, hiring managers is that they're not big fans of the AI generated content, right? Whether that's for the resume, LinkedIn, stuff like that, which is silly because all these companies are trying to use AI to be efficient, more accurate, exactly what people are trying to do by using things like ChatGPT and Claude to build their resume. However, it does kind of write in the same type of patterns. It usually defaults to like corporate speak, that kind of slop that no human ever talks like. So I've actually changed my approach. And this is something that, you know, we're working on with Nari's engine as well, is to, you know, almost buck the trend of traditional kind of resume speak, right? And just make it sound a bit more human, a bit more like we're telling a story, right? Now there's going to be different situations are going to call for different measures, right? So if somebody's applying for a senior leadership role at JP Morgan, I'm going to go with more of the buttoned up, very corporate-y kind of style. Whereas if somebody's trying to get a marketing gig at like a cool, trendy startup, I'm going to go with the much more loose, a little bit more of the storytelling element, right? So again, it depends on what companies you're targeting, what you're looking to accomplish, what roles you're looking at. You want to try to reflect that language within the resume and do it organically, right? You don't want to, you know, say I have a bias for action, which Amazon, that's one of their big leadership principles. If you're not somebody who's proactive, right? You don't just want to say it for the sake of saying it. We need to try to back it up with, okay, this is how I use that bias for action, and here are the outcomes. Let's see if we've got any other good ones I haven't covered. How do you answer the tell me about the gap without sounding defensive or over explaining? Like I mentioned before, the simplest answer is typically the most effective, right? And we always want to drive back to value. So this goes for any question during an interview that could lead to a negative response, right? So for or tell me about your greatest failure. What do most people do? They focus on the negative aspect. Instead, what I challenge people to do is a little two-step pivot over to how we demonstrate value, right? So for example, if you were to ask me, Ryan, what's your greatest weakness? I would say, well, I feel like I'm Superman and I can put the world on my shoulders and there's more than 24 hours in a day. That's not realistic. So here's what I've done to fix it. I've implemented a new project management system, which has enabled me to stay much more organized. My team has been exceedingly more efficient and our revenue has gone up 35% year over year. So I'm not even talking about the negative thing anymore. I'm talking about how I'm making money, saving money, building better teams, getting stuff done. that little pivot back over to value can go a long way towards shining the light onto why you're the best person for the job, as opposed to what could be perceived as a negative. So again, if somebody's asking you, well, tell me about, I see that you last job was, last year, what was going on? Again, drive it back to value. If it's taking time away from work to recharge the batteries, just say, hey, you did, took this opportunity to kind of refresh, reset, get a greater perspective on the value that I can deliver as a professional and what opportunities are going to allow me to do that. And this has led me to you today. Simple, easy, to the point, right? I don't need to over explain. I don't need to, what's the word I'm looking for? Paint over anything. It's just, this is what I did, and this is what I'm going to do for you now. Because the thing to remember is, at the end of the day, hiring managers only care about how you're going to make their lives easier. And when we can answer that question early and often and earnestly, that's what makes people want to pick up the phone and say, all right, when can you get in here to start? Right. Well, those are all the questions I had for today, and don't see any new ones on the chat. So I think I will cut it there. One thing I'm going to do is put a coupon code for Nari in the chat. So if you use that, that will give you access to the platform for a year for $30. That's going to include the career engine. We have open office hours with me, so it'd be a similar setup to what we did today, answering questions, going through people's resumes, stuff like that. There's also opportunities to book one-on-one coaching with myself and our team of coaches who are just brilliant individuals. And we also have a community where we share insights, support, celebrate each other's wins, a lot of cool stuff in there. So we'll be doing a little bit more posting on Nari and the different things it provides, but just wanted to share that in case anybody's looking for a little bit of extra help in the job market. Otherwise, appreciate everybody hanging in there as I rambled through this hour, but otherwise, hope everybody stays safe, does well in the job market, and we'll catch you next time.